Alright folks, today I'm here to take you through the third volume of the Walking Dead comics, Safety Behind Bars. If you haven't seen my videos covering volume 1 and 2 yet, I'd highly recommend checking those out beforehand, as I will not be reintroducing the characters that we first met in those installments. Now, this is the chapter I think the comics really start to find their groove, and I think that really comes from the slower pacing. The previous installments were all about finding safety in this new world and jumping from place to place. But now that they've found what looks to be a potential home, we get to see what it looks like for our survivors to try and build a life in the apocalypse. This version of the story is quite a bit different from the TV version, so I'm excited to hear what you guys think about it in the comments down below. And with that, if you end up enjoying this video, please consider hitting that like button, and drop a sub to see more videos like this. Following a long search for a new home, Rick and company had believed they found sanctuary at the Green family farm. But as boundaries were overstepped with Herschel, the farm's owner and a currently grieving father, our survivors would be forced to leave to try their luck on the road. Everyone minus Glenn, who took the risk of staying behind as he had found something worth fighting for. But their luck would soon turn for the better as an abandoned, yet overrun prison lies before them, ready for the taking as their new home. Pulling up to the gates, our group is able to get them closed while locking the roamers in. But refusing to sleep in the RV another night, Rick devises a plan to take Andrea and Tyrese on the inside in order to clear the dead, while separating the rest of the group on the outside of the fences for safety. And with daylight burning, they would get to work, hacking and slashing and shooting all the walkers in the prison yard with little trouble as they remain spread out. But here, we truly get to see how well our survivors can work together, as a second larger wave of roamers emerges from the shadowy prison halls, giving Andrea a chance to really prove herself as an asset as she quickly collects additional ammo and stands by Rick and Tyrese's side as they gun down the horde, securing the yard but still setting up camp on the outside for the night once again to everyone's displeasure, as the prison's interior had yet to be cleared. But what this whole excursion tells us, if they're challenging the dead on their terms, they are a lot more calm and collected. Unlike what we saw at Wiltshire last volume as the group fled for their lives in panic. After many tribulations, morale was finally starting to rise amongst our survivors as Tyrese and Rick scout the inside of the prison the next morning. Coming across a rather well-lit cell block, the two come to the conclusion this area would be perfect to live in, but in the next hall over lies a barricaded cafeteria door, and from Rick's past experience, he was expecting a fight on the other side. But breaking it open, the two would come face to face with a group of 4 men in jumpsuits, sitting around a table who generously offered them meatloaf, as, according to them, they have more than enough food to feed every seat in this building for weeks. Believing the men to have been prison guards for some reason, Rick would quickly invite the rest of the group inside to join, while informing the kind strangers on the status of the world as they had been locked in this cafeteria since the beginning. And after initially believing the group was there as a rescue team, Rick would finally clue in these men were prisoners that had been locked in when the guards fled as the dead tore into the rest of the population. A revelation Lori does not approve of, as she demands to know who they are and what they did. Here we are officially introduced to Axel, who was in for armed robbery, Thomas, who committed tax fraud but claims it wasn't his fault, Andrew, who's in for various drug-related crimes but is now clean, and Dexter, the ringleader of this group who was in for murder, but jokes about them having nothing to worry about unless they were his wife. They're a bit eccentric, with Andrew blaming himself for the apocalypse, having believed God sent it to get him off drugs, but Dexter offers to show Rick around the prison, taking him to the fully stocked pantry and the gym locked with handcuffs that was absolutely crawling with roamers, a problem to deal with later. The rest of the prison contains everything they would ever need: a laundry room, showers, and even a garage filled with buses and fuel. It looks like this place will work, and despite the prisoners seeming kind, Lori mentions she's glad they're staying on the bottom levels. But outside the cells, Rick and Tyrese are heard arguing over whether or not to return to the Green family farm to invite them to stay at the prison. A suggestion Tyrese, Lori, and many others disagree with, as Herschel was clearly unstable. But they concede to anyway, as Rick is their leader and believes the more allies they have under their roof, the easier this place will be to clean up. And after returning to the farm, Herschel would surprisingly put up no argument to the proposal, as they have continuously been seeing an increase of roamers by the day. So reuniting the group under one roof, Tyrese works to burn the leftover bodies, as optimism for this place is high, and even reports he saw Alan smiling for the first time since Donna's death. And although Lori is still skeptical of the prisoners, they seem okay in his books. Speaking of Lori, we get the revelation she believes she is halfway through her pregnancy already according to Andrea's calendar, putting us roughly 5 or so months into the outbreak, as it's more than likely the baby is Shane's. It can be hard to convey the passage of time through comics, so I'll be sure to mark how deep into the timeline we are when it comes up. Despite his chaotic actions last volume, Herschel comes around to sincerely apologizing to Rick for what he did, which he accepts graciously, putting an end to their animosity while tying up all the loose ends from last chapter. Well, except for one. Tyrese's daughter Julie and her boyfriend Chris have been showing continued defiance behind his back since their introduction, by constantly trying to sneak around and manipulating the single father into letting them keep guns for protection, all while lurking in the shadows with a threatening demeanor. But once given a shred of privacy that first night in the prison, Julie and Chris would sneak away to get together, before revealing their weapons and preparing to execute their plan. And as the group peacefully sleeps their fears away within the protection of their new home, the sound of a single gunshot would ring through the halls. This subplot is so well set up because everything about their words and actions point to an incoming assassination attempt on Tyrese. But rushing his way to the source of the shot, Rick would discover his new friend holding his daughter's cold body as Chris cries in the corner. The two had intended to take each other's lives simultaneously in some sort of pact, but Chris fired too early, leaving Julie to bleed out within seconds. Wailing in grief, Tyrese would beg his daughter to come back, and unexpectedly, she does. Faint groans fight their way out before Julie fully reanimates and attacks her father. Pleading with Rick not to put her down, denial sets in as he believes he can get through to her, but that would be shut down just as fast, as Chris shoots her in the heat of the moment, causing Tyrese to lunge, strangling the kid with his bare hands before telling Rick to leave him be. He's gonna wait for him to turn, and then do it all over again, but slower. Returning to the cell block, Rick informs the rest of the group of their losses, while announcing the revelation Julie had turned without being bitten. This is quite a shock on its own, but Rick lays awake at night wondering about its implications. Approaching Tyrese the next morning as he continues burning bodies, Rick informs him he told the rest they both shot each other, leaving the grieving father's actions with Chris as their secret. But Tyrese is clearly in shock, acting as if nothing happened, leading Rick to ask Lori if she will keep an eye on him, as he has some business to take care of outside the prison to her annoyance. And without saying another word, the ex-cop takes off on a motorbike found in the prison's garage, following the same trail they took to get there before arriving back at the Atlanta camp. Here, Rick approaches Shane's grave before digging him up, and as expected, his ex-best friend rises as a roamer. He couldn't sleep wondering if Shane would have put him down given the roles reversed, and despite what happened between the two, Rick wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't. So pulling the trigger, he walks away, refusing to waste the energy burying him again. This was a cathartic trip for Rick, but things were beginning to heat up back at the prison without him. Nobody knew how to approach Tyrese after what happened, including his girlfriend Carol, who gives him his space as he works on burning the bodies. But others weren't having as hard a time communicating, such as Patricia and the prisoner Thomas, who surprisingly begin to flirt as she and Otis had split up within the last few weeks, with Otis remaining back at the farm alone to attend to the livestock. Maggie and Glenn also continue to take advantage of their newfound privacy as they find a barber shop within the prison walls, giving each other interesting haircuts before informing the young Rachel and Susie on where to find it, as they also want to join in on the fun. This will be important, I promise. But while they run off, Tyrese asks Glenn to assist him in clearing the gym of the dead, and with Billy Green and Andrea's help, the four get to work. However, while fighting, Tyrese goes rogue, abandoning the group in an attempt to take on the horde alone, but unfortunately gets swarmed, almost as if that were the intention, forcing the others to leave him behind as they were overwhelmed. Informing the rest of the group, Carol breaks down in tears, believing her new boyfriend to have essentially taken his own life by feeding himself to the roamers. But unfortunately, the tragedy wasn't over, as while looking to let Maggie know what happened, Glenn would come across the remaining Green family sobbing, collapsed right next to Rachel and Susie's turned severed heads that had been discovered in the barber shop. Fun fact, this plotline was originally going to be adapted into the show, with Beth being the victim of Axel, but was cut due to fears of being too dark. Yeah, okay. Immediately, fingers are pointed towards the convicted murderer Dexter, earning him a spot back in a locked cell like the good old days as they investigate what happened, just in time for Rick to return and learn of all the death that has occurred in his absence. But after hearing they never saw Tyrese's body after they left him, Rick, Dale, and Glenn frantically make their way back to the gym, just to discover him sitting among a mountain of bodies completely unharmed, asking the shocked survivors what kept them so long. This has got to be one of my favorite Tyrese moments from the entire series. Despite the much needed win with Tyrese returning to embrace Carol while accepting the death of his daughter, not all was well among the prison, as Alan continues to confuse his sons with depressing talks of death, while the Greens remain in shock, with Herschel now having lost 5 of his 7 children. And to make matters worse, his son Billy blames him for Rachel and Susie as he made the choice to bring them there. Confronting Dexter on the twins' deaths, the convicted murderer claims he had nothing to do with it, but Rick lets him know if he does find out he's responsible, he'll beat him to death himself. And after daring Rick to say that without the protection of bars, Officer Friendly opens the cell door and mad dogs him into backing down and walking away. But in secret, he tasks Andrew with finding his way to the hidden armory deeper within the prison, as it was now loud and clear they weren't all going to be friends when this was said and done. And Andrew, having actually been in a relationship with Dexter during their time trapped, would do anything to stick by his side, as he didn't want to lose him now they were free. Rick later cries at the thought of the twins' deaths being on his hands, as he was the one who told Herschel it was safe to come there, and after revealing why he left in the first place, Lori would only stare in silence as Rick was clearly feeling the weight of leadership in the New World. But despite the horrors of the day before, most everyone was continuing on with their new lives in the prison. Glenn, Dale, and Axel come up with ways to defend the fences from roamers, while Carol and Tyrese find some much needed alone time. Even Carl agrees to be Sophia's boyfriend after months of resistance. It was finally starting to look like calm waters were ahead, with Andrea even finding time to make use of the laundry room, while being joined by the prisoner Thomas shortly after, who kind of just stands there watching her, quickly making her uncomfortable with his staring. Asking him why he's there if he's not gonna do chores, Thomas boldly claims it's so he can cut off her head. Yeah, tax fraud my ass. Clearly, Dexter wasn't their guy, as Thomas overpowers Andrea while standing over her with a knife in hand. Cutting her deep across the face, Andrea manages to escape before rushing out the doors with the madman close behind, and quickly realizing what's going on, Rick would tackle and beat him down to the point of being unrecognizable. a result of his pent-up rage and self-blame as previously mentioned. Debating on what to do with the beaten killer, most agree he should be executed, with Patricia burying her face in her hands having thought him to be nice. But Lori snaps at her husband as she disagrees with his decision, believing he should either be locked up or let loose, causing the fed-up Rick to bite back, telling his wife to shut up as he was elected their leader, and it's ultimately his decision. The new rules are, you kill, you die. So Thomas was to be hung for what he did. But later, after hearing the fear in Carl's voice, Lori realizes she was wrong, as even she agreed with Shane's death despite his crimes being far less. So after apologizing to Rick, she concedes with his decision to hang the killer. Evaluating Andrea's wounds, it appears she will have a scar across her face for the rest of her life, but that's nothing compared to what could have happened if she didn't get away. Meanwhile, Rick's hand is fully busted up from beating Thomas, and after getting it patched up by Dale, he frees Dexter from the cell, letting him know he's off the hook. But distrust has already been sown deep into him, as he was nothing but friendly to them, and was still accused in spite of it. But letting Herschel know they have the right guy, he confesses to the beaten Thomas he forgives him and will let the Lord judge him for his sins, but still wants to watch him hang. However, after putting him in a locked cell while they gather the right materials, Patricia would sneak in to free the man, believing him to be sick, not evil. But naturally, Thomas would prove her wrong by attempting to strangle her before getting kicked off. And before he can spit out another disgusting word from his broken jaw, Maggie would gun him down right then and there, declaring she feels a little better now. Throwing his body to the roamers, Herschel and Billy watch with tears in their eyes, while the others discuss what to do about Patricia freeing the monster. But that discussion was gonna have to be put on hold, as Dexter and Andrew emerged from inside the prison, fully armed as they had succeeded in looting the armory, and now had Patricia on their side despite her near-death experience. They were grateful to have been freed, but after realizing they would never be accepted within the group, Dexter declares it was time for Rick and his people to get out of his house. Alright folks, and that was The Walking Dead Safety Behind Bars story explained. As mentioned, this is where I believe the comics really come into their own, and although some of these early issues can be seen as having some over-the-top edgy moments, they still serve a purpose in showing the dangers of other people as well as giving us the revelation you turn no matter how you die. I definitely enjoyed this installment over the previous two way more, as it seems like Kirkman was beginning to really settle into what he wanted the series to be. But if I were to choose which version of the story I prefer, I think I'd still choose the TV version, as I have a huge soft spot for those first few episodes of Season 3. Killer Within is in my top 10 episodes of all time, and I just think the Lori moment is way more impactful than the Thomas murders this early on in the prison arc. At this point, it kinda just feels like Kirkman's beating Herschel while he's down. But I will say the events of both versions are quite different, with the prisoners serving a larger role than they did in the show, and the governor is still a ways off from being introduced as of now, which makes for a much more interesting experience when comparing the two. So please let me know what you thought of this volume in the comments down below. But that's gonna do it for me today folks. Thanks so much for watching.